this idea of different sort of Chinese bureaucracies processing what AI and machine learning is going to do differently. Can you give us a little bit of a breakdown of weapons manufacturers versus the PLA versus Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Track Two dialogues? How are all these ideas being filtered differently through those organizations or groups?
Yeah, so I think this is a podcast where I can trust the audience understands that China is not a monolith. And the fact that is not a monolith and China's government is not a monolith sort of plays out in unique ways in terms of what they're up to when it comes to military harnessing of artificial intelligence. So starting with the diplomatic part of the story and the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there have been negotiations at the United Nations in Geneva on regulating in some way the use of autonomy in weapons systems. So, lethal autonomous weapons is the term of art that is most commonly used in international discourse. And back in April 2018, I believe it was, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs put out a paper that said that the Chinese government would support a ban on the use of AI-enabled autonomous weapons, but would not support a ban on the development of AI-enabled lethal autonomous weapons. So the challenge in all of this, right, is that you have folks who are keeping track of these dialogues who are not AI experts or not national security experts or perhaps even not an expert on both. So the headlines that went out, around the world were China supports ban on lethal autonomous weapons. And there's a bunch of very important asterisks there that relate to what we were talking about in terms of the complicated, Chinese foreign policy org chart. So the first is that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is part of the Chinese government, whereas the People's Liberation Army is the military of the Communist Party. Now, obviously, both of them report up through Xi Jinping, but the story there is a little bit more complicated. In the United States, when the Secretary of State says something on a defense issue, around the world, people basically understand, right, that the Secretary of State is authorized to speak on behalf of the United States as a whole. The same is true of the Russian foreign minister. But in the case of China, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs does not always speak for the People's Liberation Army. And so actually the People's Liberation Army has said relatively little in terms of what it would be interested in or what it would put up with in terms of diplomacy related artificial intelligence, whether that's coming up with some kind of international norms around what types of technologies are allowed to be used in what types of contexts. In general, it's been radio silent for the PLA. And the weapons manufacturers, some of which are state-owned enterprises, some of the largest ones, have been incredibly bullish on the use of AI in weapon systems and the use of autonomy in weapon systems. So there's no formal international definition for what an autonomous weapon is, but there is an official DoD definition of this, which is the ability to select and engage targets without further human intervention. So once the human says, "Hey, I'm putting you in autonomous mode," then the thing can go, find its own targets and engage and perhaps even kill them, right, without further human intervention. That's what we in the DoD define an autonomous weapon as. Well, there's plenty of Chinese weapons manufacturers who are, in their marketing documents, describing capabilities that are consistent with that definition. Some of which are even being, we have records of them being exported internationally. So, for example, the Xinyan Blowfish A2 is one weapon system that falls into this category. So this makes it really hard for a diplomat or somebody such as myself in the DoD to really understand in which cases is one part of the Chinese state not talking to the other. And it also, makes it a little bit confusing for folks in the United States, whether that's in think tanks or academia or the technology industry, to kind of understand what's going on with China. Because when you see a headline that says, China supports a ban on AI-enabled autonomous weapons, you think, oh, that's perhaps a favorable development for world peace. But The unfortunate reality is that a lot of the actions are not backing up, that type of posture.